and welcome to the Service Operations Podcast. I am your host, 𝗪𝗏𝗂𝗃𝗧. Our guests are from different industries and functions. They will share their experience, strategies, and the changing landscape to help you take the service operations of your business to the next level. Hi Kalyani, it's nice to see you and connect with you today. You've had a very long journey and your career has spanned a few decades. With all your experience, I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Tell us about your career and the path that you have taken.
Firstly, hello Sachinda, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. And I hope that the people listening to the podcast will actually, and even watch it, that they would get some benefit out of it. So talking about careers, I've been through many different ones, and most of it out of choice. And I think that when I started off after university, I had qualified as an attorney, and I started with private practice in one of the other provinces, the KwaZulu-Natal province. And I practiced there as an attorney. My children were very small at that time. And I even wrote my conveyancing exam and became a conveyancer. And I was in practice there for about 7.5 years. And then this new South Africa, the new democratic South Africa, was now in place. And that was in 94. So in 95, we were now feeling brave enough, and we didn't mind working for the government because it was now a democratic government. And so I applied for a position as the state attorney's office in Johannesburg. So it was a move of a province as well. And I applied for the deputy position and the state attorney, so the head of the office, and I got the state attorney position. So that in that role, we were the government's attorneys. So Johannesburg was fairly big, and big cases were all there. So it was a really great time, and it was also about transformation because it was the new South Africa, and predominantly it was the white community that occupied most of the roles, or especially the senior ones. And so it was a challenge for me to turn around that office. And without sounding conceited, I actually when I got there was no black attorneys at all. There was one Indian and one, what we call in South Africa, colored attorney. But both of them left before I started because I was their junior. I was their junior at university, so they didn't want to work where I was the boss. So anyway, so I had a whole office full of white attorneys. We were 45 attorneys. And by the time I left, which was about 7.5, almost 8 years later, I left the office with 55% black attorneys. Black being Indian, colored, African. So, so that was great. It felt nice to have achieved something. And then I moved on from there. And strangely enough, I gave up law. So my dad was a bit upset and he was saying, how can you give up being a lawyer? And I said, I'll always be a lawyer. I've still got all the qualification and experience. But what had happened was it was close to the Y2K issues, on IT, and everybody was worried about what was going to happen. So the Department of Justice, where the state attorney fell under, they decided that we must rewrite the financial systems for the state attorney's office because we held a lot of money in trust and all of that. So I applied for that position. I had felt like I had done what I needed to do in the state attorneys, and now I wanted a challenge. And so because I was heading up the project for the Y2K, for the state attorneys, the bug of IT bit. So I was now interested in the IT side of it, but obviously not from a technical side. It was more from a business side because I don't know code and all of that. So anyway, I must say I was only there for 2.5 years, but it was an amazing experience. And your viewers and listeners may find this quite funny, but being a lawyer, I didn't know the technical phrases and words in the IT environment. So one day I was
the jargon.
Yes. So one day I was in a meeting. Yeah, I was sitting in a meeting, and my staff were there, and another division staff were there. Yeah. So when I left the state attorney's office, I had run a project for the Department of Justice on the IT side for the Y2K issues, which we thought would come up, but anyway, it didn't.
I know it never
And
came.
yes, but anyway, it was a good opportunity because we rewrote the financial systems. And with the state attorney holding government's monies in trust, or even the person on the other side, their monies in trust, it was important for us to have good systems. Anyway, so what happened was this shift from being an attorney to the IT side became so exciting. And I felt like that's where the challenge would be, and I would get some benefit out of it. It's always important to learn new things, when you go to different jobs. It becomes too mundane and boring if you do the same things all the time. So I applied for this position as the head general manager for the systems management and optimization. And my role there would be, in terms of the business side, to look at everybody in the Department of Justice, make sure that everybody had email access, and that kind of thing. So creating that whole network. But it was the technical people that dealt with the actual work. Ours was just to do the client relationship with all the different divisions in justice. So it was important. We were the client-facing people there. And then when that it was really an exciting time. And I was saying that, I remember, because it was a new area for me, they used to use words like dongle, and I used to wonder, what is a dongle? And I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to learn about this, until I came out of the meeting and I called one of my staff and I said, what is this dongle? And then when she explained, I realized how silly it was. It was not anything complicated.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was. I was only there for 2.5 years, and it was a great experience. I got to go to the Government Leaders Conference in Seattle and at Microsoft's campus, and it was a great learning experience as well. And, a lot of the things that I saw, that was in the early 2000s. They talk about, in there, they showed you a prototype of how children would roller skate to school and with their laptops in their bags, and how you would find that the laptop would just switch off. In other words, it denies them access to any games and all of that the minute they enter the perimeter of the school. And then when they get into the class, it was only schoolwork that was on the screen. Yeah. And I mean, now it's like normal, but at that time it was, gosh, will it ever happen? So,
yes.
So it was exciting times. Yeah. And then even got to go to San Francisco to the Oracle offices, and, it was exciting times. And then when I was then headhunted by the Director General of Justice to assist him with a project where women collect their maintenance from their husbands or their partners for their children. So it's maintenance, they go and collect it. So that system, everything was really in a bad state, and the department was getting such a lot of bad publicity. So the Director General asked me to go and help him for 4 or 3 months and to fix that court. So I went there and I did it. I took 4 months, 1 month more, with no budget. We painted shelves and we pulled out carpets and we just made it look presentable, because it's so sad that people who have no money, they're coming there and they sit. And what was important that I picked up, I have to tell you that when I went in the first time, they didn't know me. So I went under a sort of disguise. I went in on a Friday afternoon when it's very busy, and I sat as if I was one of the claimants. And I got the experience of what was happening. And it was young people behind the counter who showed no respect for the people who were waiting for this money. And I realized then that if you want to be customer facing, you have to have the skills to deal with it. You can't just say to the person who's been waiting the whole day, just go and stand in the corner, and you can't talk to people like that. So there was no water for anybody. There was no toilets nearby. So it was a difficult time. So, it was a challenge for me to get all of that sorted out. And then the Director General then, because I helped him out in this project, he didn't want me to go back to the IT division. He wanted me to become his advisor. So I only had that role for 6 months, because in that 6 months where I was advisor to him, everything that would go to him came to me, so it was really nice. And then he got appointed by the president of the country as the head of the NPA. And I was in India at the time. I was on holiday in India, and I came back, and he told me that this is what's happened. The president's appointed him as the head of the National Prosecuting Authority. And he said that he told the president that he wants his advisor to go with him. And the president agreed. And so by proclamation, all that was done. And I moved with him. And it was probably one of the most exciting times again. And I always think that, in South Africa, we always feel like we mustn't work for government and that kind of thing. But it was the greatest lessons that I learned working for government, all the protocols, all the different policies, how you interact with people that have complaints, because everybody wants their case to go to court, and it's all that kind of thing. So it was dealing with all those complaints and trying to appease people and try to do the right thing. So I used to get up at 4:00 in the morning, and I used to drive to Pretoria every day. It's an hour. I used to be in my office by 6, and it was because we owe it to the people, because as working for the government, we're using taxpayers' money. And I felt like it was really important that we delivered that service. We were using people's money to run our departments. So we were very, very focused on that. We'd get up early, start work early, make sure we respond. We had a 24-hour turnaround, which was magnificent, and you don't get that anymore. So, it was enjoyable. And when you enjoy and you have passion for what you do, it's easy. It comes easily. So, so it was a very exciting time. And the head of the police in the country, we were investigating him, and he was charged. And it became very involved in politics. And my boss, who was the head of the organization, was suspended for no reason at all. And a year or so later, he was cleared. But when that happened, I refused to work for government. I felt like it was not the right thing to do. I didn't want to be a part of anything that I felt was not how it should be. So without having a job, and I always say that he likes me upstairs, that I handed in my resignation. And in the 2 weeks that I took leave before my period of resignation could start, I, in that time, saw this job with the banks. And I didn't even know which company, the name of the company, because the recruitment agency didn't disclose that. And it was actually the job with SABRIC, which is the South African Banking Risk Information Center. And like I say, God willing, I got that job. I finished on a Friday in the NPA, and I started the job on Monday. I begged them to give me 2 months leave, and they said, no, we need you now. The CEO was leaving, and they wanted to hand over.
So Kalyani, just, I'm just recapping your entire career in a way.
Yeah.
You started with law, and then business technology.
Yes.
And then, of course, partly, you were in departments which were serving citizens of the country. And then you moved to the bank. So, I mean, so how does this whole thing tie up together? And before we start talking about the banks, how does this whole thing tie up together?
So I think it's very much an issue around leadership. So, I have always felt comfortable. From the age of 32, I was running a company, or running a department. So I had become used to what was required, and it came to me almost naturally. So I had no problem with dealing with conflict. I had no problem with dealing with great innovative projects and getting the staff to feel that they own it and that it was through them. You don't steal other people's glory in all of that. So I think I enjoyed that, and it was more the leadership thing, which and having the legal and a little bit of the information technology side actually put me in a great position to accept and to run the organization for the banks. So, it was different, but like I've always done in any job that I'd gone into, I always started from the bottom of interacting with staff and going up the ranks just to know what people do and hear for myself what it is before I decide that I want to change the strategy or do something different. So yeah, I enjoyed being with people. It was always for me the thing that I liked. I don't think I could sit in an office by myself all day and not move. And currently my situation is that I am in that position of where I'm sort of on my own. And I used to, because it was so busy with the banks, and we can talk more about that just now. I used to wait to have some time off. I used to keep saying, when people interviewed me, they say, what would you like to do? And I used to say, I want to be a housewife. I've never been a housewife. I had 2 children in between my degrees, and I never stayed at home. Yes. And I said, I'd like to be a housewife. I'd like to get up one morning and say, oh gosh, I have nothing to do today. Yeah. And now I'm in that position and I don't like it at all.
But actually what happens, so what happens is that, once you're on the treadmill, it's like that, and you want to run and you, yes. And it becomes very enjoyable when when you have passion and you're really liking what you're doing. That's important. But what I also hear you say is, apart from, what I saw is that you took these risks of jumps from one to the other. The other thing also what I'm seeing is that, it's important to be this hands-on person, as in, you really need to understand the person part of it before you, take decisions and implement them across.
Yeah. It's very important. Yes. It's very important because it gives your staff confidence as well. Like when I started work for the banks, I would have my secretary come in and say to me, I've just ordered you lunch, and I didn't even ask for anything, and the coffee. And I said, I don't normally eat too much during the day. And, they felt offended because they felt like I wasn't happy with them and I didn't want them to serve me tea. But the reason why I used to get up and go to the kitchen myself, I was the CEO, but the reason why I went into the kitchen myself to make my tea was because I had an opportunity to talk on an informal basis with my team.
Yes.
So you meet them. When you're sitting in a meeting, people's whole disposition is different. Yeah. But when you're standing in the kitchen, both doing things and mixing and pouring water and that, you on a different level. And it enabled me to connect. And I think the previous heads, by the way, were all male. And I was the first female. And in South Africa, we considered generically black. And so it was the first ever in the country. So they were not used to it, and they were surprised that it was easy to get going with it,
The informal, it's an informal setting. It's not like, you're sitting across the desk and then everything changes and you become, you put forth your best when you're in a senior's office in that sense. Yeah. Tell us something more about, what is the work that you did in the banks? And of course, later, you can also tell us about IPSA, and that's how, we connected. So, how did this whole thing come about? Yeah.
So what had happened was about 20 years ago, the South African banks, the 4 majors at that time, now there are 6 majors. So the 4 major banks in South Africa, which was ABSA, First National Bank, Standard Bank, and Nedbank, these 4 banks got together because at that particular time, when they decided to make this decision to form this company, bank robberies were absolutely rife in South Africa. It was like 2 or 3 bank robberies a week that was happening.
That's quite
and
a bit. Yeah.
it was really a frightening situation. I wasn't there at the time. When I joined, they were just under 5 years old. And so the banks decided that instead of each of the banks having resources that the bank is paying for those resources, to do the same thing that the other banks are also doing, because it was bank robberies. The criminals, they don't worry about the brand.
Oh no.
They don't care which bank it is. Wherever there's opportunity, they will go. So I think the banks here in South Africa were actually quite smart to recognize that. And they said, instead of each of us having our own resources, let's have one organization where we will fund it and we'll put resources in. And there's no competition in fighting crime.
Yeah.
So it wasn't dealing with business issues. So we'll put them together and we'll let them interact with the police. So basically, that's how it started, very small. They seconded people to the organization, but eventually it used to sit with the banking association. And then eventually it started to become so big. The needs became more.
Yes.
So they realized that they have to change it to a company. And so it was a private company. And then government now puts their back against the wall when it's private company, because you feel like, no, am I colluding with the private sector, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the banks changed it into a non-profit organization, and their key functions were for bank officials to liaise with the police department, so that they could give them information, help them to understand how an ATM works or how anything works. And in this day and age with cybercrime, all the different things. So that was one role. The other role was to all the data that came from all those banks, it would be collected at SABRIC. And SABRIC would then analyze all of that and would then give back reports to the banks to show where the risk areas were and what needed to be dealt with and the possible solutions to those things.
That's very interesting, because see this, the collective effort, as they say, fraud, like how I would look at it, is a fraud is the other side of customer service. So if your customer has to face a fraud is defrauded of something, it's a disservice.
Absolutely.
Responsibility does lie with the bank to make sure that the customer is protected. That's how it should be taken. Even though the customer has his own, some responsibilities, but eventually it's a loss. And the bank who loses, unhappy customer. What I'm also hearing you say is coming together of the banks. Other is that you were talking about physical robbery. Now we are moving to data.
Cybercrime.
So how is that transition? Because, of course, now with social media, with internet, technology, and the new kind of frauds that are happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what had happened was, while we started with 4 banks, when I got into SABRIC, we started bringing on more banks. So we brought on, by the time I left, I think we had 18 or 19 banks that were part of this group. And yes, you're right. From cybercrime, from physical crime like bank robberies, things started to move. Banks started coming out with cards. So you didn't have to stand in a queue in a bank. You had cards. You could buy and pay and do all of that. And then beyond that, you now have digital cards, and you have you can tap and go, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the public, from the public's perspective, and the experience that I had of that was that the public were extremely nervous. They were nervous. They were frightened that, there were stories going around that if you have a bank card in your back pocket and you're going up a stair, somebody would hold a POS device. But who would do that? People will see. So I think somebody was just making the point that this is what can happen. And so the thing is that the banks decided, well, whenever there was a new modus operandi, whether it was cybercrime or whether it was physical, whether it was a theft at an ATM or card swapping at an ATM, and then things like what they call shoulder surfing, when the person behind you stands too close so they could watch your PIN number, and they jam the ATMs and that kind of thing. So all of that, we realized at the end of the day, the customers are not getting that side of it quick enough to be a prevention that they can help prevent becoming a victim to any bank-related crimes. So we then ramped up our communications, which was really important. So we started writing in very simple terms, not using any hyperluted language or anything. We wanted everybody to understand. And then in South Africa, because we have 11 official languages, we also chose like about 4 or 5 of the more common languages, and of course English and Afrikaans as well. So we used to do communication in that. So how we used to do this, we used to do billboards, we used to do community radio stations, because you can't reach everybody. Everyone doesn't come to the city. So we did community radio stations. We would pick a topic. If we say we're talking about card skimming, we would explain what is card skimming and how people can protect themselves and how they must always cover the keypad so that their number is not being viewed by anybody, because often people would put hidden cameras onto the ATM, and then when you were sliding it in, they would be able to pick up, your password, and then the card gets stolen because somebody is waiting to steal it, all that kind of thing. So we eventually started doing videos where we would show the public how these things were done, because we used actual incidents where when the bank's cameras caught all of these things, and how we showed people how it's done, because they would never believe that somebody can take the card out of their hand and they not know it. But we showed people how criminals do that, So it became quite powerful.
What I'm hearing you say is that this, first of all, this coming together of banks, because there's no competition in fraud. There can be competition in everything else. There's no competition in fraud. And I think one of the great initiatives is this banks coming together, because then, you are able to create so much of awareness.
Yes, and also protecting your systems. You could collectively talk about how you're going to be, blocking your own systems and how you do it. And if a bank had a problem, then the other banks would learn from it. I must say that while it's not an easy thing to get right, because even though you say there's no competition in fighting crime, there's always some level of competition. So, but I think we got it right because people began to realize that they have to share their data, because there will be a time when your bank is going to be the victim.
It's like, who will speak
or
for
your
you?
Bank client.
If you don't speak for others, who will speak for you?
Yeah. So that's why you know that there's a time will come when you have to rely on another bank to help you, or the collective banks to help you. So, through that and the successes, people bought into it. And then, so then we used to do television. I used to do once a week on television, where the interviewer would ask me we used to identify the crime types, and then we would talk about it, and then in between we'd show a video if we had it. And it became quite popular because people like to see. They don't like to always read. So when they hear and they see the videos, they get a better sense of what's happening. And that became quite a lot. And then we did lots of social media. So we put things on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter and even on LinkedIn. So we used to have our designers, which we outsourced to the people who do all the digital art and all of that. So it became interesting. You have to. The one thing that's important, you can't do the same thing all the time. You can't just do text. because people get bored and they don't want to read it.
And it's also
it's important. Yeah.
It's also important. One is to give the message. The message is a very important thing, And I think also that when you're doing it collectively, when the entire banking system or the entire financial system is doing it collectively, the expanse is huge. So now what about the other side? One is about educating the customer, making them aware of various things. And then was there some kind of work around managing complaints or some kind of, system built around that?
Yeah. So 𝗪𝗡 didn't deal with the public directly.
Okay.
We dealt with them by communicating, but we never dealt with them in terms of complaints because each bank has their own division that deals with complaints. And then you have the banking ombudsman who oversees that work.
Yeah.
So ours was more voluntary work. There was nothing where we were bound by regulation. It was just, it worked well, and it was economies of scale.
Yes.
Because if you were paying $10,000 a month for 10 staff or whatever, or 20 staff, here you would pay a portion of that, and because everyone is sharing.
Yes.
The cost of running the organization. So it was, for me, I got lots of value out of it. I felt so proud that we could be teaching people. I'd have people call the office, although we never had a complaints desk, but we never turned away anybody. So people would call and say.
I'm just trying to relate those 2-3 things. So one is that you have a legal background. So you're a lawyer, it's in the blood, even if you're not practicing, it's there. You did technology, business technology, and you did it at very crucial times, when we are saying Y2K, or, when you're actually converting some department into technology. I'm sure these two had, a good role in what you did at 𝗪𝗡.
Absolutely, because my interaction with government leaders, when I was in the Department of Justice, I used to interact with ministers of different departments. Being in the state attorney's office, you are the minister's lawyer. That office represents ministers. So I had the opportunity. I never used to go to court because I had all the attorneys go. My role was different. And so I became quite familiar and used to government protocol and interacting with ministers. I used to meet with them quite often. I used to go to Parliament, portfolio committee and all of that. Whereas now with 𝗪𝗡, although we not part of government, but government, we forged relationships with ministers in the Justice Department, in the Finance Department, in communications, in Home Affairs. And that's an important thing I wanted to tell you also about the Home Affairs project. So that's the government people registration, where you do your identity numbers and all of that. So what we did was we approached the Department of Home Affairs, and we asked them, because of identity theft being such a big problem, and the Department of Home Affairs was now gone electronic on everything, we asked them if, from a bank perspective, people are coming in, we told them people are coming in with false IDs, they change their photograph and all of that, and they open bank accounts, and then they borrow and do all kinds of things, and then they
you can't find them.
So from a crime prevention point of view, we approached the Home Affairs and we asked them if they will give us access to their database. And they did. We convinced them that we weren't going to do anything funny with it. The data protection was there. And the banks, when people went into a bank, they were asked to consent to their biometrics being taken. And then it will go straight into Home Affairs. And we had a very short response, like 2 or 4 seconds, that you'd get a yes, it is that person, or no, it's not.
We have the Aadhaar as a system in India.
Yes.
Aadhaar, it works on similar lines. So where the biometric can be, it's a messaging basically. You don't get access to the data, but you can validate the.
Yeah. So that was just one example of what value 𝗪𝗡 was able to bring to the banks. And then there's always the reciprocal side. So if they do something for you, you have to do something for them. So what we did was, because there's always long queues everywhere, our banks offered their branches to be available for people to apply for their passports and their identity documents.
Okay.
So the Home Affairs Department used to have a staff sit in the bank, but what it did was it broadened the footprint of where people could go to
Made it
get
easy
that,
for
you know. So
yeah.
yes, but it's reciprocal. So you at least you do for me, and I help you, and that kind of. You have to have somebody who's willing to take the chance within strict measures. We have contracts in place and that kind of thing. So if you don't try, you're never going to be. I mean, and you know, in India, you guys are so innovative and always come out with things that the rest of the world follows.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
So now just tell me, one is that this is, bringing together people, the various units or the financial units in South Africa.
Yeah.
And now we also have associations at the international level. So if you see this International Banking Security Association. So that's at the international level. So how does information exchange, like this basic data and best practices, is there some kind of an arrangement for that?
No, the problem there is that a lot of countries have regulations in place that don't allow them to share certain information. Also, you have to worry about tipping off. So you can't get involved where you're tipping off a bank and that kind of thing, even here in South Africa. So I think the important thing was that it was voluntary in terms of us sharing trends. So while we didn't collect actual stats from each bank that participated in IPSA, but we collected trends. So you'll find, like, if we were having cash in transit heists in South Africa, we also had them as part of our organization. We would be able to share the modus operandi, what kind of explosives are being used. We would be able to compare it with what was happening in Europe. And also it gave you the opportunity that if a bank in one country was starting to see something that the others didn't, it alerted you to the fact that you have to take some measures. Yeah. And the nice thing about it is that well, language is an issue, but most people speak English. Yeah. And also bank practices generally are the same, you know. The rules are more or less the same. So I think it was by having the exposure, and you could pick the phone up anytime and speak to them or ask for help, put a set of questions together, send it out, and even if 20% response, at least you're getting a bit of international best practice without paying a cent. Yes. Your membership allows you to have all of that. Unfortunately, while I was chair when I got sick, I'm an honorary member, but I'm no longer operating member. Yeah.
Your contribution has been immense, and you've been there. You were a member for a very long time. Banks, financial institutions, as there's a lot of competition in terms of what are the products, what are the kinds of services, new channels. But there's really no competition as far as fraud prevention is concerned. I mean, one has to really do it. And I think preventing frauds it's a service to the customer, because you're actually protecting the customer, and that's like a really very big responsibility.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think a lot of banks now, because of the communication that goes out from the bank itself and from this organization, most often the banks would use what we have. So the important thing was consistent messaging.
Yes.
You don't want one bank to say it in a certain way and the other one, and then the public's confused. So the one thing we were very careful about was everybody had to be consistent. And if a bank was running a campaign, they would always make sure that we're there. So, it was always, we were able to answer questions and all of that. So it's a really great model. I can't tell you more of. I remember, I met a man who was on the board of the Bank of India. And when he heard about this, I was doing a work visit to India, and I was in Pune, and I met him at a meeting, and he was saying that it was such a wonderful concept to get that, whether it's a government bank or whether it's a private bank, you have to share and you have to talk, and you can do it at lower cost because you come together.
Yes.
So I think there's lots of value in it.
So, what you're saying, in India, of course, there is an exchange. There is an exchange of information. Now, of course, it's like, everybody does it more or less, and the customers are identified. And I'm sure when you started it wasn't a thing that was heard of and was being done. So, at that time, it was like, something new. I think maybe the first, one of the first countries to do it.
We actually didn't know of any other.
Yeah.
We didn't have anyone to compare with. And I think some countries, people are still so scared to share their information. But I think the kind of incidents that people are seeing and the amount of monies that can get stolen, they've now realized they just have to.
And also, it is between countries now. It's like overseas. So you're losing money here, but the money is going to another country. So, unless everyone is aware of the way frauds happen, I'm sure you would have not directly dealt with, but may have heard of it. I have also dealt with, and I still do, of customers who have lost money. And it's really very sad.
Yes.
And
it is.
You actually feel helpless because, sometimes there's nothing that one can do. There are, procedures in place for dispute handling and things like that. But, most likely the fraudster is always smarter. So, the money just is not there. Yeah. So the customer thinks the bank is responsible. The customer thinks the bank is responsible. And in the initial days, when these internet banking and these card frauds used to happen, the trust on the banks also used to get dented sometimes because the customer used to feel there's some problem with the bank systems. Of course, we've come a long way from there, but that feeling of trust, the feeling of that something may go wrong anytime.
And especially at the time when you want to encourage people to bank rather than keep it under the mattress. You want people to bank. So the important thing is that reputational damage for the banks is quite a serious thing. So with us, we're trying to, what we would do in here in South Africa, we used to, if there was an incident where more than one bank was involved and people lost money, then I would go in from a SABRIC perspective and I would deal with it because it was an industry. Any bank can have clients that have been the victims of card fraud or, those kind of things. So it helped from a reputational point of view.
Of course.
For the banks.
Reputation is an issue. You lose money. And it's a matter of time. You lose time. You're not able to push the digital, initiative forward. So it's in all it's negative. So Kalyani, your experience has been like really something different than what most of us in the regular course face. To conclude this, what is the kind of message that you would like to give to people who are managing service operations, because they are the ones who deal with the customers and they are the ones who work on the operations piece?
I think the one thing that's very important is you always have to know who you're serving. You have to know who you're serving. Are you serving the bank or are you serving the customer? So it's a fine line between the two, because obviously you work for the bank, but you have to also understand what people go through. And that's very important because that affects banks' reputation. If a person comes in and says, look, I had my card with me, but I lost that amount of rupees or what, a certain amount of money, but my card is with me. And you can't tell them, well, then I'm sorry, because if you have your card, only you know your PIN number and only you know this, and sorry, we can't help you. You got to understand and try and find out what happened. If you just turn people away, you're going to damage your bank's reputation, and also, the bank customer can actually leave. And it's not that banks only want to have like top end customers. they
Yes.
serve everybody.
Everyone.
The rules apply to everybody. So it's very important to take that into account and to make sure that you can balance between, the bank side and the
Employer
customer side.
and
I think it's very
consumer.
important. Yes, the
The
financial
employer
side.
and the consumer.
Yeah, it was just a great opportunity to have had worked there and to be able to serve the public. And people who couldn't understand English, like in India, you also have different languages. So
Yeah.
you
Yes,
do it in the vernacular, and you help people to understand. So it's important.
When you're speaking, what the thought that's coming to my mind is that the point of contact between the customer and the organization. I mean, any financial organization
Yes.
for that matter. And
Yes.
even when you're using the best of technology, you use bot, you use WhatsApp. The chats are happening in an automated mode, etc. But I think another important point is for that sensitivity to sense that something is going wrong. See, sometimes a customer doesn't understand, and he might just say that, something has happened to me, but it's for the company and that point of contact to understand that, here maybe something is not normal, something is going wrong, and raise a flag at the right time, because you can prevent like huge.
I think the whole idea is for people not to accept that if a bank says they're sending you a document and you see the bank's logo, you have to be suspicious. That's the most important. You have to be suspicious of everything that comes. And like as an example, the people very often used to become victims. They receive an email from a particular bank, which is their bank.
That
So
was
the criminal, obviously, they take a chance.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And then they'd say, thank you so much. I just want to let you know that your money has been paid into your account. And everybody, from a human perspective, you want to know what money was paid into my account, and you click. And so it's those kind of things that you always have to alert people to.
To be careful, and to the points of contact, to also be alert and be able to pick what's going wrong. So, Kalyani, it's been an awesome, talk with you. Some of my favorite topics, because the last, assignment, the bank was fraud prevention and reputation management.
Right.
This really comes straight down, but below, there is this customer at the base of all this, and when you're understanding the customer, that's where you are. So before we conclude, one last message from you to the listeners.
I think mine again would be more on the leadership side, especially people who are wanting to build their careers. Don't feel afraid to change. You may have a degree in science, but you actually have a passion somewhere else. Follow your passion. Don't do it recklessly. Don't just leave your job without having another one. But I think follow your passion. I have learned that over the years. I've never been afraid to go into an environment that was new to me, because it's your responsibility to make sure that you understand where you're going and what you're doing. If you have to study something again, well, then do it, So I think with India, you don't have to convince anybody to study. There's just such uptake on people, so long as you can afford it, you can study. So, I would just say that's the important thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Kalyani.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Same here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you then. Bye-bye, Satyan.